What human experiment would you want to see happen if ethics was of no concern? Story 1. Human reproduction in space. We talk about the future of long-term space missions, so you'd think this is a critical thing to test out. How important is gravity in both conception and fetal development? On some level, I think that NASA has secretly tested this. If they haven't, China or Russia certainly has, right? Story 2. I would rent a giant island and fill it with 1,000 guys named Dennis. I would leave them the tools to survive if they worked together. Then I would add one guy named Brian. When they introduce themselves to each other, I would watch Brian intently while the experiment takes place. Will he turn into some kind of leader, or will he just be lost in a world of Dennises? Story 3. Can we use CRISPR to give humans back our awesome ape fangs, roughage digestion, hair to protect from sunburn, and climbing abilities is what I want to know. Like, could we make a human with all the cool and useful ape traits, but still our normal intelligence? Story 4. Brain transplants. 2 years ago, there was a scheduled head transplant in Russia that ended up being cancelled. They were going to stream it, and I was very intrigued to find out the results of it, just for the curiosity of scientific progress. Story 5. How far can we replace the entirety of the human body with the exception of the brain, with mechanical components? Synthetic organs, servo limbs, circuitry-based nervous system all connecting to the brain. How far can we go? How close can we get to almost pure cyberization? Could we replace half of the brain behind memory and logic with an entirely computerized part, so the individual can think faster and better? What would happen if that half of the brain had a true artificial intelligence linked to the human conscience? Would they coexist? Would the AI understand the human concepts better? Would the human even be able to survive the process? Do they still have their soul? Would sensors to essentially replace our senses and replicate them in our brains keep us from feeling less human? Basically, how long until I become a tech priest, dammit? Story 6. Locking people in dark rooms for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and a decade. I'd like to see what happens to their vision and mental health. I work at a cave, and when I was in college, I asked a professor for a class on sensation and perception about what the darkness can do to us over long periods of time. He told me after about a week your brain would start to adjust, and it would likely set off other sensations to go off unnecessarily. Like your brain will hallucinate senses outside of sight. After a month, your brain, still adapting, would start to think the occipital lobe in your brain, which covers your vision, will begin to shrivel and give energy elsewhere in the brain where it's needed. Eventually, you will lose the ability to see. That all sounds bad for mental health, so I hope that helps both parts of your question. Story 7. Take someone with severe schizophrenic delusions and mold their surroundings according to their delusions. Example. They think they are Jesus. Get a bunch of people to act like they believe it and start following them. If they think the government is after them, make some men in black capture them. What would happen with their delusions? This reminds me of an experiment that was done with 3 delusional people who all believed they were Jesus. The 3 were put in a room together to see how they'd react to others with the same delusion. All 3 of them were quite nice to each other, but concluded that the other 2 were delusional. Story 8. Conditioning children. Start from the infancy and put them in various types of parenting, from a scale of strictest to most lenient. All of the factors are the same, just different parents. I really want to know the effects of parenthood to children. And since we are casting aside ethics, all the infants should be exact clones of each other to finally solve the nature versus nurture dilemma. Story 9. Death experiments. Effects of extended sleep deprivation, already known to be fatal, however extended timeline of symptoms is unknown. Total sensory deprivation. Remove all senses and have subject report experiences. Insanity is sure to follow. Lifetime caloric restriction diet effects in humans. Estimates of effects are 4 times remaining lifespan. If implemented from birth and maturity, what is maximum lifespan? Story 10. Lots of unethical experiments in early childhood development, learning, and education. Basically, come as close to solving education as possible with a series of trials and controls. Gene editing experiments and trying to genetically enhance intelligence. We would be trying to create a next generation of far smarter humans, who could then design better gene tech and education programs for the next generation, and so on. Story 11. Mock trials where the jury doesn't know they are a part of it. New rules, though, if they push for the death penalty, they must have a hand in the matter. On the day of execution, they are all in separate rooms and each other with their own buttons, with the inmate hooked up to a lethal injection device. They have 1 minute to push a button, and it must be unanimous. If not, the person is acquitted. Would people do it? Would they have the conviction if they had to be held to their word? I think people like to say things but don't follow through. Of course, at the end we would reveal it was an experiment. What bias would we see, and what not? The people that are not being told by outside figures what to do. The system is the same in that the jury decided the death penalty is appropriate after the usual court proceedings. Thing I am changing is that instead of them passing their judgment and walking away, they have the chance to anonymously take it back, or have a shared hand in finishing it. So it's not so easy to separate yourself from the gravity of the situation. It would allow us to get some data on what makes people so sure of such drastic measures, and how peer pressure and reflection may change their mind or cause people to reevaluate their moral code. Story 12. That island where the missionary died a couple years ago, Centennial Island. I would capture a native and bring them back to a facility. We'd care for them, earn their trust, and learn their mythology and culture. I want to know their mythology. They literally get fire from heaven. I want to know what they think it is. I want to know their view of the world. I want to know everything. Story 13. Can a human die of physical pain alone? If a person was tortured with little to no physical harm to the body, let's say artificial simulation of pain receptors or something like the Cruciatus curse for Harry Potter fans, how long would they last until they just died? Story 14. I might sound crazy, but what if you just made an enclosure habitat with a human baby male in it and let it live in there? Feed it food and water secretly without it being exposed to other humans. And when he becomes an adult, let in a human female and see if A, the human male has sexual desire for the female, B, tries to communicate with the female, and C, displays monkey-like behavior. Story 15. I've always said it would be interesting to raise a child in a colorless home for the first 15 years or so of their lives. Make them live in a home where everything is white, all the furniture and whatnot. Only allow them to eat food that they can dye white or gray or something. The only color that they can see is their own skin. I'd go to the point of even dyeing their hair white too. Have some caretakers help raise them, but those caretakers also must wear a wig or dye their hair white and wear gray contacts. The kid can watch TV and do whatever else inside the home, but no color at all. Then take the kid outside and expose them to a forest and then a city just to see how they react to all those new colors. Story 16. Human breeding programs for different traits would be cool. Take quite a while to do the experiment, of course. But can we create a sub-race of 8-foot-tall people, or humans who can sprint 30 miles an hour? How about someone with the human analogous temperament of a golden retriever? Story 17. Get a bunch of kids and lock them away on an island. They have to be young enough to not be influenced by the culture. Then I want them to make their own. What kind of civilization will they build with no knowledge of the world, languages, stories, religions? Who knows what they do? We'd probably have to introduce some sort of resource though, and babies can't really survive on their own. But we'd figured out a way to do it. Story 18. Get 3 islands, all with easy access to fresh water, forest, and arable land, and that's it. No communication from the outside world, except for a small library of books. Populate one with billionaires, one with a random sampling of Americans, and one with Americans living below the poverty line. See what kind of societies will arise. I read an article about a real-life Lord of the Flies situation, in which a small group of young men from the South Pacific were marooned on one island for a long period of time, and they actually did quite well. No one died or even came close. It probably helped that these young men grew up in the similar environment, knew what was safe to eat, how to fish, etc. But I vaguely recall the author of the article contrasting the cynicism and selfishness of the Lord of the Flies characters with the collectivist values of their IRL counterparts. And perhaps that was the reason the IRL boys made it out alive. Story 19. I may sound like Hitler, but I just want to tell you all right now, I'd never ever condone something as despicable as this. That said, I've always wondered how different personalities would react to torture and imprisonment. How long would it take for each one to break down? Are there certain personalities that are better at handling the torture and imprisonment? Questions like that. Story 20. In physics, there is a very rare occurrence where two atoms can pass through each other. This means that there is a very, very small chance that you could throw a ball at someone and have it pass right through them. So I want to see someone have a ball thrown at them until it passes through them. Story 21. Take the richest, most self-serving assholes on the planet, toss them on an uninhabited island, albeit one with plenty of natural resources, i.e., good amount of game, fresh water, arable land, wood/stone for buildings, and nothing else. Will they go Lord of the Flies or be able to survive? What condition will the island be in at the end? I think, to quote Hobbes, the experiment will be nasty, brutish, and short, but I would hope to be surprised. Story 22. The One's Dark. In the 1940s, Russian scientists tried to make the head of a beheaded dog show signs of life after pumping fresh, oxygen-rich blood through its head. As the results were surprisingly enough positive, the scientists wondered if it could work with a human being. When the setup was complete and turned into action, the head started to show signs of life, after which the scientists immediately stopped the experiment. I would like to see what that head could do. Story 23. Genetic experiments. Add genes of different animals into human DNA to see if we get special abilities without any negative consequences, ultimately giving us X-Men-like mutant powers. Which one do you want? The one I've always thought is the most overpowered with the greatest chance of backfiring horribly is complete immortality. If you can't be hurt, damaged, or altered in any way, what happens to your body? Do your muscles never tired? And if they don't, can you still become stronger? Does your hair still grow? And if so, how is it cut? What happens to your brain once you live long enough? Are you older, less important memories overwritten to make way for new stuff? Will you forget who you used to be? What happens to you in an event that would mean certain death for a normal person, say getting lost in deep space? Are you going to spend the time between that event and the heat death of the universe stuck, wishing you fall into a black hole so that everything goes faster? Where will you be when the end of everything has come and gone? Story 24. Put people into a haunted place without them knowing the history of this place. If they have a paranormal encounter and see the same things that aligns with the place's history and other stories, then it'll be really interesting and scary. Story 25. Democracy, but not representative one. I want to see how shitty or great life would be in a country where every issue must be voted by every citizen via smartphones or post offices or whatever method they pick. For, against, abstain, absent, like on Reddit, but something like for every 10 absent, your tax grows by 1%. Story 26. Chuck 24 kids in an arena. It's a Hunger Games situation, but they don't know that. I'd like to see if they come together and form a mini society, or resort to killing each other for food/going insane. Story 27. Put a baby in a room with just a television on one channel. No human interaction. Food gets dispensed from a tray under the TV. Have the child grow up in that same room with the same channel playing, never leaving the room or seeing another person. Then when he turns 18, pull him out and ask him what he thinks reality really is. Story 28. Brain experiments. Attempting to access someone's memories maybe in a different body, using some sort of technology and making something to view what someone is imagining. But the reason why I would deem this unethical is hundreds of devices and tests would have to be done. Probably hundreds would die in testing. Story 29. Genetic mutations. You want your child to have blue eyes instead of brown? No problem. We switch that part of genome. What about making you stronger or higher? Sure, for the right price we can do that as well. I guess we're kinda already on that road. Designer babies. For those with the cash to buy one. Story 30. How would a population of humans fare if they were led and obligated to obey an AI programmed to ensure they thrive without destroying their government? I've begun to suspect that the only way humanity as a whole can survive itself and thrive into the far future is if we get taken over by a benevolent AI and made to obey it. So far, we aren't showing much evidence that we can govern ourselves on even national scales, let alone global. Tribalism and greed are proving beyond us to overcome. Of course, we'll never willingly allow this to happen, so it's pure thought exercise, but I'd like the chance to see if my hunch would be validated or squashed by the AI overlord experiment. Story 31. A few I can think of. How little flesh can you remove before it kills someone? How compatible is human DNA with that of other creatures? What forms of pain can be turned into other feelings? Which places on/in the human body are the most sensitive? Is it possible to make people like things through torture? How do I summon demons and force them into a body? How can I send people to and from hell? Story 32. I want a simulation where people can speak only the truth. Whatever wholesome, violent, perverted, dark thoughts and ideas you have, legal or illegal, must be out and displayed for others. There will be no shaming, no forming lynch mobs on the internet. In fact, there should be an incentive to be open about other people's thoughts. I want to see how moral we are, because in my opinion, many here condemn crimes and other acts to fit in and are not actually outraged, especially the people who type disgusting to everything. Similarly, I think we'll see how common we are too. Our anxieties, interests, opinions when displayed and stripped of any political or economic benefit often tend to converge is what I have seen. Story 33. The human gene contains a specific code that makes the brain grow much bigger and wrinkled than other animals, and there has already been an experiment of trying to insert that gene into a chimp. The chimp started to grow his brains to almost a human fetus would, so the scientists got concerned of moral shit and killed the fetus before it grew too much. I would like to see that experiment go all the way. Let's make Caesar happen. Story 34. Identical clone twins raised in a Matrix-type simulation for, say, 40 years, and given identical the same stimulus, then release them at the same point. Do they think and act exactly the same? Some thoughts and words said at the same time? Are we a product of DNA and identical upbringing, or is there some probability that creates differences? My personal hunch is there would be differences, implying that probability, say from quantum level, leads to macro changes in things like choices and behavior. Story 35. Split brain experiments. To treat severe epilepsy, sometimes the part connecting two halves of the brain is cut. This leads to some freaky results. Some even imply that the body becomes the host of two people. I want to see the mute half and the brain talk and share its experience of knowing everything about being human, but generally unable to participate. Story 36. There was a psychology study done where 14 people were put in prison, 7 as police and 7 as prisoners. The people who were police took the power a little seriously, and the project was canceled only a few days into the 2-week experiment. The research was published, and I saw part of it in college. I would like to see more of ethics and morals were no concern. Story 37. Forced evolution. The last Nobel Prize can basically copy-paste DNA. Think of the possibilities if you just started engineering with DNA. Mixing different species, you could create something completely new, starting from an egg, human or not, by manipulating its DNA and rewriting what it's programmed to do. Wyverns, for-limbed flying reptiles, more flying mammals, elephants with shells, maybe even 6-limbed creatures like dragons, Pegasus, griffins, flying humans with huge wings and an electric skin, like that of an eel. Basically, if we experimented enough, almost anything could be possible, even with evolutions that aren't possible in nature. You can't just evolve 2 more limbs, hence why dragons will never exist on this planet. Story 38. Tell young, poor, mentally unstable, and devoid of skills 18-year-olds that they can opt into a voluntary program where they can get $20,000 in exchange to become sterilized. Also available would be an option to take $5,000 to become sterile after having 1 child. Those who regret their decision later in life can still apply to adopt or foster 1 child as long as they meet qualifications like anyone else. I'm curious to learn what the 50-year outcome of this program would be in terms of crime, depression, homelessness, life expectancy, divorce, prison population, alcoholism and drug abuse, economic repercussions and taxes, etc. If beneficial to society, how fast would results begin to show? Story 39. What happens if we cut down childbirth drastically on a global scale? Where is the sweet spot where society can still go on but the planet doesn't die from too many humans? Story 40. Low-dosing radiation to different cells and injecting them into people to try and force certain mutations.